Good morning and welcome everyone. As you can see, we've set this up as a Zoom meeting today because it's going to be more of a bit of a live debate. I'm delighted to welcome Graham Welland, who is the CEO of GWCI, which stands for Graham Welland Consulting International. And today's session is all around guarding your reputation and do you know who you're doing business with? So I'm Stephanie Vowles. I'm the International Business Manager here at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. This event today is part of our International Festival of Business Week, leading up to our Global Trade Conference tomorrow. So thank you for joining us today. We're going to kind of go through some questions with Graham around kind of the red flags you need to look for if you're a business that's going into new markets, and just making sure that you're doing a bit of your homework before you really commit to any new projects. So as I said, I'm delighted to welcome Graham today. So morning, Graham.
Hello, Steph.
I guess we'll start off with kind of why did you set the business up in the first place? Let's take you on that. Take us on that journey.
Yeah, okay. Well, it was very much a personal journey, actually. I'd worked for more than 30 years, a bit longer than I care to mention, really, I suppose, in large utility companies in the UK, particularly in the water industry, and doing and looking after their compliance and their reputation as a result of that. And an opportunity came back in 2017 for me to actually start this business up. Now, I'd seen for myself the impact that falling foul of regulators or not getting your due diligence or your assessments right and the risks that you take as a business can have, only too well, because I was very much at the sort of coalface of sorting that out for these large organizations, particularly dealing across Europe and legislation coming in from the EU. And I saw immediately there was a great opportunity here, and I wanted to put my years of experience really into some good practice when I left, and that was to help other companies not fall foul of that very simple question. And you can do some very simple checks, or you can do some very complicated checks if you wish to. It depends how far you want to go. To actually guard yourself and your reputation, because reputation at the end of the day is everything. So that's why I started the business up, and that's why I've got engaged. And since then, we've expanded the business massively. I've done reports in over 140 countries now in the period of time that we've been doing this information. So due diligence is not going away; it's actually growing quite considerably, and people wanted to know who they're trading with. In the markets at the moment is just growing all the time, exponentially, in fact. So the need is there. So yeah, I'm very pleased to be able to answer as many questions as you've got today. That would be good.
Brilliant. And I guess, as you said, it's more important than ever right now in this day and age, and important that the information is accessible, at any time from anywhere. So that kind of leads me on to my first kind of question then. So why bother knowing who my third parties are as business?
Yeah. So sometimes it's obvious who you're trading with. Other times it's not so obvious who you're trading with. So if you're trading overseas particularly, you should be aware of the legal obligations that you're under. There's various anti-bribery and corruption legislation, particularly anti-bribery corruption in the UK, and you've got the Foreign Corruption Practices Acts in the US particularly, that are applicable to you. So there's some issues there from a legislative point of view, but also then it's guarding against not just that now. More and more actually coming into this is the fact that people and companies want to see and understand what your credentials are as well. Do the environmental claims that you make against your company stand up? Are you aware of modern slavery, which is a very topical subject at the moment? Are you tracking and making sure that there's any adverse media that comes up against you that's out there straight away into the atmosphere? These days it travels around the world very quickly, and straight away you need to be aware of these things to actually guard your reputation. So falling foul of fraudsters unfortunately, particularly because of COVID, I would suggest at this time has been really, really challenging. You know, UK fraud alone, I know, has doubled in the last 12 months. It's said to be about £1.7 billion now. So you don't really want to be part of that. Becoming a victim of a scam is all too common these days, wherever that might be, and that might be online, or it might be through other means, you know, banking arrangements, payment of bills, all of those sorts of things. At the end of the day, the damage that that can do to your reputation is something that's very hard to retrieve. You work very hard in gaining a reputation for your business, and therefore, you know, you need to guard that because it's easily given away. I mean, extremely disruptive to businesses if that happens as well. I mean, I was just thinking today as I was thinking around this presentation, many of you will be aware of the issues that they had with Boohoo about 12 months ago with the clothing manufacturers, where there were some issues relating to their supply chain in not knowing and understanding who was doing that work for them, and essentially possible links to modern slavery. That's taken 12 months to sort out. Their share price in that time halved, and now they're beginning to bounce back slowly. It's still on everybody's mind. It's still at the back of everybody's thoughts. Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that. So, you know, that reputation doesn't go away. So you want to avoid those things if at all possible. That's why you need to understand who your third parties are. And, you know, extremely disruptive to business. You may also end up through some legislative awareness as well. And ultimately, and we don't want to see that, that can end in criminal charges, imprisonment, fines, whatever, you name it. So, you know, start at the very beginning. It might seem a small thing, but if you nip it in the bud early on, you can stop this sort of thing. But if it escalates, then your reputation and all of those things go with it.
So, okay. Steph, can I just jump in? I don't know what the rules are in terms of whether it's a brief rule or not, but I'm just really curious at the moment. And Graham, you mentioned, yeah, the issues with Boohoo and stuff. Sure. We were talking about this like 3 months ago. So we do a lot of stuff with Selfridges. And the discussion was, what, how did that come about in the first place? How did the main contractors not know the actual origins of a lot of the garments and stuff that were being produced? Because the one thing that baffled us enormously was actually, you kind of understand it a little bit if it's over, you know, in a foreign country.
Oh.
But it's in Leicester.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did it come about, based on your understanding?
Well, you know, that can come about in two ways. I mean, they may have been aware of it, is the answer to your question in some ways. They may have actually deliberately gone along that line. I don't know is the answer to that one, because I've not seen the full report on that, but there's always a possibility. There are people that then disguise that and cover that up. It's as simple as that. They had audits, as far as I'm aware of. They'd done some boots on the ground even, and actually carried out regular audits on some of these, but hadn't identified the issues that there were there. Clearly, there was a lot of cover-up being implemented in that particular case, and they never got to the root cause of that. They never actually identified until that, you know, much later on, that this sort of issue was going on. I mean, it's true to say, I think it's fair to say that most people know that these sorts of issues have been going on in Leicester for many, many, many years. It wasn't just Boohoo. I mean, I think you'll be not surprised to hear that these sorts of companies have been set up for a long, long time and established, essentially, which makes it somewhat more difficult, doesn't it? Because they're seen as an established company, and therefore they're probably okay. That's the danger that you've got there. So you know, until somebody whistle blows or somebody says something, or your audits that they've carried out identified these things, then it was quite difficult to tell.
Brilliant. Okay, sorry, Richard. Yeah, just to advise everyone, we've got about 5 questions to get through, but once that's done, feel free to pop some details in the chat box if you've got any questions, or if you're happy to answer, you know, a question live, then please do. So just kind of keeping on the theme then. So thinking about risk now. So why can third parties be risky?
Well, why can they be realistically to understand, deciding to deal with you leave yourself open to many issues. In that Boohoo one was a classic example, unpleasant consequences from legal or reputational damage. You need to check who they are, registered correctly. Are they registered properly? Are they correctly registered for their directors and their shareholders in the companies and the countries in which they operate? How do you check it? Why can third parties be risky? Have they got a website? We've come across lots of them that don't have a website, these sorts of things. So there are lots of risks that are out there. Think twice before making any payments. Think twice before making any or giving any banking details. These are the sorts of areas why they can actually be so risky if you don't go through and check those sorts of things. Legally, it can be an issue under the various anti-bribery and corruption laws. So if you're going to fall foul of those, then you are breaking the law. It's essentially that. So you have a duty to make sure that you are meeting these obligations. And that's not just you. That's also your third parties as well. So you want to make sure that your third parties and your supply chains and the people you work with, it might be joint ventures, it might be subcontractors, could be shell companies offshore. You need to understand who you're trading with, because each of those could come back and bite you. And essentially you have a duty under the legislation to make sure that you've checked these things through thoroughly, because you are ultimately responsible for that. So whether it's an individual within that supply chain, it may be causing anti-bribery issues, or whether it's the company themselves, then clearly you need to understand the risks you're taking. And I'll give you a good example here. It's not just the company that you might be dealing with. Many companies these days, particularly if you deal overseas and internationally, have trading partners. They'll have partners and also global companies right across the world into different entities throughout the world, and it can be in different countries completely. So you really do need to check through that complete supply chain, because each one of those can come back and haunt you. So we did some work, for instance, on a company in Venezuela a few years back now. But the company that we were looking at, example, was actually squeaky clean, very good. It had nice policies, procedures, all of its things were in place, and it seemed to be absolutely spot on. But when we looked a little bit further to its global company, there were all sorts of corruption issues there. In fact, there was some, dare I say it, some terrorist activities also going on within this global company. So, you know, we could advise the company, the client that we were working with, well, your company that you're dealing with directly seems okay, but this is part of a much larger organization that you ought to be aware of these things. And on the basis of this, they decided not to pursue that contract. But that's a good example of understanding the complete supply chain, not just the company that you're dealing with directly. So there are risks throughout your supply chain, from individuals as well as companies.
So what would you say kind of the main major red flags that businesses should be looking out for?
Yeah, I suppose, I suppose there are four main areas I would suggest that you can get red flags from and you need to check out. First of all, I'd say the geographic risk. What country are they actually working from? And that's pretty obvious sometimes, isn't it? Some of the countries that you read about in the news all the time. So if you're working with companies that are possibly in the higher risk areas, I don't know, North Korea, even Iran, Iraq, those sorts of countries, then clearly there is a risk there. China carries some risks as well because of that. So you should be aware of the countries that you're working in and be sensitive to those. Business partners that you might take on then, use of third-party agents, distributors, logistics providers, customs agents. Many companies use these supply chains to offer the facilities that they need for you. So again, as those stretch out into different entities and different supply chains, then clearly there's the more that are in the supply chain, the more risk you potentially could need to understand. Public sector risks. Well, yeah, public sector is interaction with governments, and all too soon we've seen that happening just recently. There's a good example there, wasn't there, of David Cameron in the Greensill situation, where there was some political exposure through governments in the work that they were doing, and the results of that are still not materialized fully yet, and I'm sure are going to be going on for some time, and a real big issue there. So it's not just at the lower level understanding your third parties, it's also at a higher level, at a country level, it's at a government level that can also come back and hurt you. And I suppose finally then, contractual risks as well. Most of you would put your own contracts into place to protect yourself in the tendering process that you would go through. I think what I would say is that contracts tend to protect you from a financial point of view, definitely, and that's the aim of doing that largely. But there was the other things that I'd mentioned as well. There are the softer ethical things as well, which you may want to consider as well, which could also come back and dent your reputation. And so do you want to consider all of those sorts of elements as well once you're considering your contracts in your tenders? So all of those sort of areas are areas to, I think, that can potentially raise red flags with you and need to be understood. And then there's always the pressures that you've got within each of those areas. And I mean, I could list out hundreds of red flags that you might want to look for, but you know, there's some simple ones to look for. Examples of, I don't know, we've come across things where companies have no website, for instance. Now, that's almost unheard of these days. Most people have a front to their company to actually say who they are. Or it can actually be such a simple website, you can't glean anything from it. Others are very well constructed. Others, then it might be that you discover they've got no offices, or the staff numbers are not able to cope with the work that you're giving them. Again, we dealt with a company in Saudi Arabia where they claimed they had 30 offices, but a simple Google search identified that they were all just locations in the desert and nothing there at all. So, you know, simple checks can actually do that sometimes. Other times it's a bit more challenging. And, you know, we actually, there are things that might, what raise the red flags, for example, that you've got there. So we did a company in the recent COVID situation where they were actually having to buy alcohol for their processes. Now, alcohol goes into hand washes, which everybody be very familiar with at the moment because of the situation with COVID. And unfortunately, all the stocks in the world were being used up. This company didn't want to use it for hand washes. They were using it as another part of their process. And unfortunately, the normal supplier for them had run out of supply. And so they actually had to look around the world then, where can we get this from? They were really struggling to actually get it. So they found a company actually in Turkey that said, yes, we can provide this for you, but we would want an upfront payment of 90% of the product before it arrived. You know, and when is it going to arrive? Well, it's probably going to take a month to get to you. And, you know, that straight away rings a few bells, doesn't it? I think that there's probably a few issues that you may want to consider there. There was another one where we had, in likewise, then they went on to another company in Poland that was offering that same product, but 10 times the cost. Fortunately, we were able to advise them to carry out some simple due diligence checks, which basically eliminated both of these companies. Unfortunately, their own old company, as it were, was able to come up with the goods in the end, so it saved them a problem. But these are the sorts of things that can happen, and that's the sort of red risks that you can run in challenge you.
Yeah, that's really good information there. And I guess as a business, then how would you assess and manage, you know, your third party risks?
Yeah, I suppose it's the question that lots of people ask me: is this totally over the top? Do I need to do this? And so I'd always say that you need to do some sort of proportionality check on that, and actually say, first of all, what risks am I prepared to accept? You know, in actually making this, in whatever the transaction, there's always some element of risk in it. So you want to understand exactly what that might be. Once you've understood those risks, you can then decide to put in place a framework to compensate that and actually fill the gaps and give you the confidence that you need. So in all of that, though, you need to have, once you've identified some of the risk, and we can talk about that, it needs to be proportional risk assessments, and you'll need to undertake a small amount of due diligence to actually do that. And I can tell you how in a little while, maybe. But choosing your third parties with care and taking them through those simple processes are most important. But you also need to do that within your company as well. So do you have the commitment within your company to do this? Are the members of your company aware of these sorts of things that are going on? So could they be flagging with you issues that they come across on a daily basis? It's going back to the boohoo thing, really. If members of just ordinary people within the company had identified some of these things, then you should be able to be heard and listened to, and that might stop something developing out of proportion to nipping it in the bud early on. Risk assessments, due diligence, we talked about. Training and communication is important, so people are aware of these things. And that's mainly why I do these sorts of talks as well, to make people aware of the sorts of things that are going on, because people just sort of sweep it under the carpet and we won't bother with that. And more, you know, companies take ginormous risks, particularly at this time in the COVID situation, and really have come unstuck as a result of it. And it's ended up with them actually, well, costing them a lot of money in basic terms. So the other thing that you obviously want to do is also monitor your companies once you've done that. And there are means in which you can actually continuously monitor your companies once they've been set up. So once you've done your risk assessment, companies like ourselves, and there's lots of other people out there, will continuously monitor those. So situations change, we can actually raise flags immediately, and so notify you of any changes that have occurred. The world's a changing place, it changes all the time. It's as simple as that. So you need to do that throughout the whole supply chain. So choose your third parties with care. Not all your third parties are going to operate to the same standards as you. You can set your own standards, and we've mentioned some of those, but in reality, many of your third parties won't. So you've got to understand the game, as I said, the risk that you take in doing that and trading with that business. So due diligence is a simple check that you can do, and I would urge people to undertake even the most basic of checks to understand what that might mean. And in those basic checks, for instance, one of the ways in which you can do that is we send out a questionnaire on behalf of companies. It's a simple questionnaire to send to your third parties to fill in. And on that, we've got, I was just looking here, we would say, check out the registration of the company. Is it registered where it's supposed to be? Do you have details on its directors? Who owns that company? Who are the shareholders? Do you know? Regulatory or reputational issues? Have they actually broken any codes of conduct in the last few years? Legal reputation issues, adverse media, and we would say, have they been in the news at all? What sort of things are coming out about this company? Good question, good idea for those is individuals that might work in your company. Glasshouse is a good one for that, where you can get individuals' comments on companies. Some of those are valid, some of them aren't. So you have to be careful and take them with the credit that they need. Experience, what experience have those companies got? You know, policies and procedures that they might have. In websites do hold policies and procedures for some people. Others that they don't. Sometimes what they say on their website and what their policies say are not really worth the paper that they're written on. Everybody, for instance, now these days in the UK particularly put modern slavery in, they'll have their own policies and procedures there. But if you read through some of those carefully, you'll see that some are actually very, very poor indeed, and others are very good. So in choosing all of these things, those are the sorts of assessments that you need to do.
That's brilliant. Well, we are almost on our time, so we've got a couple of minutes. So, you know, really good insight into kind of what people need to be aware of. I just want to kind of maybe open it up to the room. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Graham, please do. Please feel free to unmute yourselves. No? If anyone does have any kind of questions to follow up with Graham, you can obviously access through the chamber, but also Graham will be part of the follow-up email after the event with his contact details. So if anyone wants to get in touch, you'll be able to do. But yeah, that's a really great session this morning, Graham, and really glad to have you involved in this. And hopefully some really good points to kind of take away for people thinking about, going into new markets and what they need to be aware of.
Steph, can I jump in quickly?
Yeah, of course, Jim.
Morning, Graham. Good to see
Hello,
you.
Jim.
Just thinking about the kind of time process. How long do you guys need to do the kind of checks that you do? If businesses out there were looking to kind of do quick deals, and I guess that's the nature of business, how long should they build into the process to get one of your reports?
Well, you can do the checks yourself if you want to. Most of the checks are open source and available too. The difference is exactly as you say, is the time to do that. We would trawl typically through 500-600 websites to gain the information that we're after, and that is knowing where to go and saving time in doing that. So a typical low-level report, we would call it, which would just literally look for sanctions, watch lists to see if the company is on any of those listings. We would turn those around typically within about 3 days. But they can be done more urgent if there's a requirement to do that. Often the situation you've got, though, with all of these things is how fast you can get the information from registry offices throughout the world. And that tends to be the time limiting factor. Some of these you can get online. Some of them you need to actually visit them yourselves. You have to have a language expert to actually get the information. So we will use our within country representatives to do exactly that. Sometimes, for instance, Ghana takes 10 days to actually get the information through its registry. Whereas others, you can just knock on the door and you can actually appear in itself and we can get them that day. Others will take a little bit longer. Typically, we would say we do 3 levels of reports, for instance. So the low level report was 2 to 3 days. A higher level report, which was the one that we do quite often, which is their middle level due diligence one, we would say usually 5 to 7 working days for that. And then you can take that even further if you wanted to do audits or boots on the ground, as it were, to actually go and see, or at least have interviews with people over Zoom or whatever. And that could take, really, that's got to be bespoke, and that could take as long as it takes, depending on where those questions go. But I would say typically 3 weeks for that sort of information.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Graham. Does anybody else have any questions before we kind of close the session?
Yeah. The only other thing I'd say is if anybody wants a copy of our questionnaire that we put out on behalf of companies, I'm quite happy to share that with you. If you just send over your details and I'll mail it to you, that's no problem at all. So if that helps in any of the decisions that you've got with any of your companies, that would be, you might find that a useful document.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Graham. We'll pop your details on the follow-up email. But no, thank you again. Really, really good, insightful session, and look forward to working with you again. And yeah, if anybody is available tomorrow to tune into our Global Trade Conference, it starts at 12:15 until 5 p.m. Appreciate it's a long 5-hour session, so you can dip in and out if you wish. But you can register your attendance on the Chamber website. But yeah, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Steph.